So we have a real crisis because the truth is the one thing that can set you free and make a difference. And if you cannot teach the truth, what are you going to do? And I think that's our only answer. We have to stand up to this.
Okay. If we cannot teach race, which of course we have said, I think I'm saying it more than once now, that is only a social construct, can we at least talk about the injustice of the system? Because now the system we can see is set up to punish certain people. Okay, when you were explaining before, you did make mention of the fact that those who were designing the critical race theory did give as one of their excuses that the system seemed to be favoring white people at the expense of other members of the society. What do you say to that?
I think historically, having just written this book, Justice Deferred Race in Supreme Court, is well documented. And I think that's our answer. We have to show the documents. Let people look at the evidence. And that doesn't tell people how to think, but look at the evidence. In fact, one of the critics from the other side of critical race theory is that it lets people off too easy who do have racist attitudes, as opposed to saying it's just a structural problem in American society, in American history over time. And it's all gotten confused with a lot of things, such as the 1619 Project, which centered slavery, for instance, in American history, Nicole Hannah Jones. And even though that's not critical race theory, it's the making people feel uncomfortable about their history. And then as opposed to dealing with it, we want to sweep it under the rug. And we all know that if you don't deal with these issues, you're going to trip over them later. We never had a truth and reconciliation sort of movement as other countries have, such as South Africa after apartheid. And we've never really dealt with that in the United States. And so I think there is a true confusion as to what has happened. And critical race theory, as far as I know, is never taught in K through 12 schools. It might be in certain disciplines, uh, in college and in graduate school, but seldom even there. What you're trying to do is just lay out the history and the documents. And you would think that people would want to know that, in fact, one group of people were excluded from New Deal programs. Uh, and that matters, that one group of people were excluded from being able to use their veterans' benefits as another group of people. So I think that is critical for us to lay out this history through the documentation that people can understand why we are where we are. You can't predict the future from history, but you have to understand that you got where you are from our history, and that should help guide you to move forward if you really believe in those principles of the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, that all people are equal under the law.
But that all people are equal under the law, it looked to me like a joke, at least in the United States. Do people really believe that all people are equal? I mean, the people that, let's talk about the state. The state have all the apparatus of control. They have the police, they have the army, they have the constitution. They are the ones that are interpreting it. Do the politicians who are interpreting this law, okay, let me not just say they're interpreting the law. Does the politician who have all these instruments under the control actually believe that everybody in the United States is created equal, or are they just lying to the people?
No, I think that people do believe that. One of the things that has happened is they think, well, slavery was long ago and it ended, and people fool themselves. There's been studies done by psychologists, for instance, that most white people believe that there's a wealth disparity between blacks and whites, but as opposed to it being like just African Americans have accumulated, the truth is about 10% of what whites have accumulated over the centuries and years. They think it's about 90%. They don't know. And they feel that an African American has the same opportunity at being hired as a job as do white people in the community. That is, if they're qualified. What they don't understand is that's not true, that the evidence shows otherwise. And that's why it's so important that we teach the truth, that we put the evidence there so that people understand. But I think we have sort of created this myth from our history that all the problems were solved. They were solved with Brown v. Board. They were solved with the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 1965. And so now everything is equal. And I think most people will say that things are a lot better. People in general are not lynched when they try to vote, although there's still some problems, there's no doubt about it. And so they see it very differently than the reality of how we got there and how we got into the disparities getting worse and worse over time. Whereas African Americans may now, their wage be closer to whites or better, their accumulated wealth is not. And that is the more important statistic to understand for where people are in society wealth-wise.
All right. Now, looking at the critical theory, as it were, which specific problem was it designed to resolve? And how was it supposed to resolve this problem, looking at the reality today in the United States?
Yeah. Well, it probably never ever was designed to solve a problem. Critical race theory was a way to understand societies. Others have applied it to say, I mean, you have, as I said, so many different approaches to it. Others have applied it to say, well, you need to make corrections in society, but itself is just a social theory. If I could take a little time, I can talk a little bit about Derek Bell, who was the founder of it and is often misunderstood. See, I think we need to take seriously this critique. We may not agree with it, but we need to take it seriously to understand. And it doesn't have to be critical race theory, just looking at historical evidence. And I think there are sometimes you would say that the problem have been people who actually have malice in their heart and are racist toward black people, not just the structure of society is called problem. And I like to remind people that Derek Bell actually loved Howard Thurman, who was the great mystic black theologian, one of the greats of the 20th century. And Bell was deeply influenced by his teachings. In fact, in 1978, after watching a recent full-length interview with Howard Thurman that was broadcast on public broadcasting, PBS, Derek Bell wrote him telling that he wanted to be among the multitudes, I'm quoting here, who delude your office with favorable comments. Our whole family enjoyed it immensely. He thought that one interview was not enough, and Bell wrote PBS suggesting they sponsor a whole series of shows that would give a long-term forum to present Howard Thurman's philosophy. In 1982, Bell was invited to the wedding of one of his former students. He couldn't attend, but he sent a present, a copy of Howard Thurman's autobiography with head and heart. And I'll quote here what he wrote to his African-American student. As wedding gifts go, we hope you will consider this a combination toaster oven, silver platter, crystal goblet for your soul. Howard Thurman was a great man whose greatness grew out of life experiences that with his abiding faith in God, he translated into sermons and writing that offered insight and provided uplift to all who came into contact with him. Bell then suggested the essence of critical race theory and the spirituals were quite similar. Both could, and I quote, communicate understanding and reassurance to needy souls trapped in a hostile world. Bell often quoted Thurman on the spirituals and black religion. For Bell, as for Thurman, the spirituals were the first and most enduring example of how persons of African descent in American captivity during and after slavery ended legally were able, and I quote, to make something out of nothing, carving out a humanity for themselves with absolutely nothing to help save imagination, will, and an unbelievable strength and courage.